Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you. We'll start off with a little bit of fun. There you go. Good catch. Not quite Tennessee football, but I'm Greg Dalton, founder and co-host of Climate One. I'm really excited to be here for a special conversation with Justin J. Pearson. Really excited to have you all. Let's have, right? And we're recording this in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'd like to acknowledge the Ohlone and other indigenous people who have stewarded these lands, unceded lands, for 10,000 years. And there's many bands around, different tribes working to restore their culture, heal from historic trauma, and protect their traditional territory. I've had the privilege and honor of getting to know some indigenous people, Coast Miwok, near where I live, north of San Francisco. It's been really an educational experience for me to find out the flaws in the fancy education I had and really get to know. And I encourage you to go beyond these land acknowledgments, which sometimes can be seen as performative, and get to know people in your community. They're still here. They have not been erased. We're recording today's conversation for the Climate One radio show and podcast that drops every Friday. You can subscribe wherever you get your pods. You could do it right now. And we record here on this stage about once a month. We had a fabulous event at a big hall on Monday night with Jane Goodall. That was amazing. I don't know if any of you were there. You can see that on YouTube. And coming up on October 1st, we've got a triple header. Really excited that marine biologist and co-founder of the All We Can Save project, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, will be here with Bill McKibben, co-founder of 350.org and Third Act. And they'll also be here with Earth Justice President Abigail Dillon. You can get tickets for that on our website, climateone.org. That's October 1st, right here. At the end of today's conversation, we'll have some questions from the audience. And there's question cards on your seat. Please write your name and a concise question, and our team will collect them, and I'll call out a couple of names, as many as we can get to, and ask you to go to the microphone and present your question to Representative Pearson. I'll just note that he has a plane to catch afterwards, so we're going to just let you know that. And it's my great pleasure now to welcome Tennessee State Representative Justin J. Pearson. That's almost Jane Goodall level kind of enthusiasm there. Well, he caught the national spotlight for his stance promoting common sense gun legislation, assault gun ban. He's long been a strident, strong advocate for climate and environmental justice. He worked to defeat a multi-billion-dollar crude oil pipeline that could have poisoned Memphis drinking water and taken land from South Memphis residents. And the Sierra Club recognized him as the 2023 National Changemaker of the Year. Please give it up for Justin J. Pearson. Welcome. I'm really excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
First time in San Francisco, right?
It is my first time in San Francisco, but it won't be my last.
Okay. You like it so far? Yeah?
So far, so great.
Well, you were catapulted into the national spotlight because of, assault rifle ban. And many people know that you've been engaged, but many people don't know you've been engaged in energy justice for a long time. Let's begin when you were living in Boston after graduating from Bowdoin College. You read a news article about a gas pipeline in Memphis where you spent part of your youth. So how did that article change your life?
Yeah, well, again, Greg, thank you, and thank you to everyone here, and to my Balboa friends as well, for being so amazing and wonderful. Look, I got engaged in the environmental and climate justice movement, not as a person who's been doing this 30 or 40 years. It was one article written by MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism, about this crude oil pipeline that they were planning to run through a neighborhood where my family has been for 100 years, in southwest Memphis, in Boxtown and Westwood. And they said, we chose this neighborhood because it's basically the path of least resistance. And
they said it out loud.
They said it out loud, which is rare. right, for them to say it out loud. We know what they're thinking. That land agent got fired, believe it or not, who said that, of course. But he told the truth about what they believed. They looked at political disinvestment, economic disinvestment. They looked at the lack of opportunity that the community had been given for so long. And they said, here's a place that we can exploit. They didn't understand the resilience that was there, the culture, the history that was there. And a classmate, many years before me, had posted this onto Mitchell High School's Facebook page. And I read that article. I saw the comments that were made. I saw that many of the political leaders weren't engaging at all with the community that was being impacted. And on October 17, 2020, at the height of the pandemic, 50 people all masked up. 7 of them, my family members, went to this meeting, heard from the pipeline company how good this project was going to be, how necessary it was if you were going to have toothbrushes. And products that rely on crude oil. And then we heard from Protect Our Aquifer, an organization who said, look, this will actually run through a well field and could destroy our drinking water. And then we had another group come, Caesar, and they said, well, we're the most seismically active place on this side of the Mississippi River. And so if an earthquake were to happen, it would rupture and it would destroy our drinking water. And just a quick note about Memphis. Memphis has some of the best drinking water in the world because our drinking water is 2,000 years old. It's been filtered through to this aquifer. So what we drink as water was rainwater 2,000 years ago when dinosaurs were hanging around. And so we have really some of the best water in the world. They're going to threaten that. And in the process, Clyde Robinson and Scotty Fitzgerald tell the land agents they're not going to sell their land. And they get threatened with eminent domain lawsuits. And so on October 17, 2020, Memphis Community Against the Pipeline is born. And from that day until July 2nd, myself, my family, our community is organizing neighborhood associations, is calling every single politician, is starting to do marches down City Hall. My first march, believe it or not, had 4 people. One of them was named Pearson, so it really had 3. It was my oldest brother. And ultimately, we get the attention of former Vice President and Nobel Peace Prize winner Al Gore. We get thousands of people, white, black, in North Memphis, South Memphis, East Memphis, organized and galvanized, and we ultimately defeat this project with people power and with a community that showed we're the path of resilience, not the least resistance.
And that leads to you running for office and being elected to the Tennessee State Legislature. In March of 2023, a former student walked into the convent school in Nashville with 2 assault-style rifles, killed 3 students, 3 staff members. Shortly later, you and a fellow legislator, Justin Jones, were expelled from office by Republicans for personally protesting in the well of the legislature and joining demonstrators in the public areas of the Capitol building. The day after your expulsion, Vice President Harris takes a detour, makes a surprise visit to Tennessee to affirm President Biden's support for a ban on assault weapons. A couple weeks later, you're in the Oval Office with President and Vice President. Yeah. That's like, a mind-boggling ascent into the national scene. Suddenly, your face is kind of, national news. What is that like for you? How did that change your life?
Yeah, let me start with this. Representative Dr. Barbara Ward Cooper is my predecessor. She was 93 years old when she passed away, and to this day, she was the hardest working elected official that I've ever met. 2 months before she passed, we were texting each other at 1 o'clock in the morning about Tennessee Valley Authority and their environmentally racist practices, including a toxic coal ash plan that was going to run coal ash through our neighborhood and then leave it in South Memphis. And when she passed, and I got a number of phone calls, particularly those of people who I had never met, who said you could really help to continue her legacy, I decided to run in a special election. And that's ultimately how we won the primary, and then we won the general on March 14th, my mother-in-law's birthday, March 14th. On March the 27th, I get sworn into office. It's the same day of the Covenant School shooting. I have my dates right. And 2 days later, we don't have session that day. We gavel in and gavel out. 7,000 people show up that Thursday. Mostly young people under the age of 18, some teachers, some parents, and they're screaming, do something. Ban assault weapons, pass a red flag law. They're just making all these requests. 7,000 is the largest gathering and protest that we've seen in Tennessee history, in modern history. And instead of legislators listening to the students or listening to the parents or engaging in any way, they laughed at them, or they pointed at them and snickered, or they took pictures of them, or they just looked down at them and walked by. And there's something that happens when the people who are angelic dissenters, who are of good moral courage, show up inside the institution. It forces the people who are within it already to stand up with more courage. And so we went to the well of the House floor, not in and of ourselves, but with the spirit of ancestors and those who are devastated by the impacts of the epidemic of gun violence, who want us to do something and want us to have transformation. And it all happened during Holy Week. So that Friday that Vice President Harris came to Nashville, Tennessee, was Good Friday. And when we think about democracy, when we think about the sacrifices, when you think about these things in the spiritual context, it is a lot about the persecution the government has against people who stand up and speak up and fight back. But it's also so important that we always remember the resurrection. And that for a lot of people who are no longer with us, including the 6 lives that were lost at the Covenant School, my classmate Larry Thorne, my cousin CJ, my mentor Dr. Yvonne Nelson, there are so many people who are not able to speak up and protest and stand up. We have a responsibility to do so. And so even in the Oval Office, it was asking President Biden, Vice President Harris, what more can you do? And so months later, we got the first ever Office of Gun Violence Prevention open at the White House. And we were able to be there and sit front row as that happened. We are still advocating for laws to be passed at the state level, but in between time, the Memphis City Council just won a lawsuit for us to put referendums on our ballot to ban assault weapons, to have extreme risk protection orders, and also to make it so that people have to have a permit to carry a firearm in our city. Like, we're fighting back in all the ways that we can, and that's what people power does. That's what I think the attention that the folks, Republicans, thought they were putting on myself and Representative Jones to shame us, really put the spotlight on them for the harm they were doing to democracy, and the need that we have to do everything we can to end this epidemic. And getting attention from the president, the vice president, and for me, the future president of the United States, shows that there's more that we can do and must be done.
So you had worked in, environmental justice. You were kind of thrust into the gun issue, partly because of what happened on the day you were inaugurated. You're newly in power. Some people would often people would see gun safety and violence and energy and climate change as like very different issues. Are there common threads? Are they connected?
Absolutely, there are common threads. I mean, one way is you look at it as this: what are the communities that are most impacted by pollution? The same communities that are impacted by pollution are the ones that are being devastated economically with opportunity, being educationally deprived, and are also the most polluted. There's intersection.
So pollution and guns are concentrated in the same places.
In the same places. And it's no coincidence that places that have more lead pipes and the less infrastructure, positive, good infrastructure, are also places where you have incidences of more of the effects of crime or violence. Right? Like the intersection is really about where is our society not caring for people, and where is, as Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali saying, there being places that are sacrifice zones. And those places overwhelmingly overlap. And so when I think about our environmental and climate justice struggle, the same community that I was knocking doors for to defeat this pipeline and that we were organizing and rallying for at Alonzo Weaver Park are the same communities that I knocked doors for to run for office, and are the same people who marched to reinstate me to continue to serve as their state representative and elect me. It's like we can't separate the harms that are happening to our communities, the extraction that's happening from corporations, and the attitudes and the actions of people in power that perpetuate not just pollution, but perpetuate poverty, perpetuate inequality and injustices that have long-term ramifications.
And I've heard you talk about people who see the status quo and think like, well, that's just how it is, or that's like the way it always will be. And you talk, I think you mentioned this, and they accept the social and economic inequity. And, I kind of put myself in that, honestly, before George Floyd, like, well, this, I grew up in this part of town and there's those people over in that part of town. And like, I didn't make it this way. And you talk about, and learned a lot since in recent years from people like you and others. And you mentioned angelic dissenters, people who are comfortable with the status quo and honestly like, it doesn't have to be like this. But say a little more about angelic dissenters.
Yeah, I mean, let me be honest with you. Before the pandemic, I had a frame of reference for why I think things were the way that they were, or the solutions that I thought that were the best solutions, and it was almost singularly focused. The way to fix injustice at that time, I was thinking, well, it's just economic. People just need jobs, right? Better jobs, everything else is going to improve. And this happens for a lot of the issues that people care about. You say, we just need to fix that, and then everything else. The ripple effects of that are just going to be so beneficial. But I think the reality that I learned as well post George Floyd's lynching and Breonna Taylor's lynching and Ahmaud Arbery's lynching is that we have social structures and systems set up that are leading to these different outcomes for people. That the realities that we are experiencing, that our children, our nieces, and our nephews are experiencing are not isolated, but rather they are part of a lot of systems interplaying and interlocking in ways that oftentimes is creating harm. And so after the Summer of Black Death, after we got involved in the pipeline fight, I started to get a better understanding of the systems that were impacting all of our lives in all of our communities, and the reality that there's not going to be one singular fix, there's not going to be one singular way, there's going to have to be a way that we think about injustice and think about changing it. And the way that we have to do that is by being angelic dissenters, and that's in two ways. One is that what we are talking about, Greg, here is pure. Everybody deserves clean air, clean water, clean soil. I want that for everybody, right? Like what we are talking about is a pure reality. Everybody deserves access to the opportunity to be who God has called for them to be beloved, right? This is pure. And we have to dissent to a status quo that is saying different. A status quo of economic exploitation, a status quo of educational deprivation, a status quo that says you all deserve to have plants and deserve to have pollution and deserve to have politicians who don't care about you. And then these folks over here, they deserve all the good things. Right? We have to dissent to that. And you think about the Supreme Court. You had Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor say, with fear for democracy, I dissent. We have to say, with fear for our future, we dissent. We dissent to unjust policies, unjust practices, unjust people in positions of power. We have to dissent. And I believe that it is a movement of angelic dissenters in this movement for justice rooted in love that say there has to be a subversion to this status quo that's not just going to save our planet, but save the people who are here, save lives of people like my grandmothers, God rest their souls, who died from cancer because of 17 toxic release inventory facilities being around our community. We have to dissent to this, and we have to do it in a way that is pure, that is love-centered, and that is people-centric.
I learned a lot from Abram ex-Kendi and talk about, some people can do racist and anti-racist things in the same day, in the same paragraph. People are not the sum of their worst acts. So I'm wondering, you are now in a legislature, with Republicans who may, back bills that you think are racist, but can you find, but they're not, maybe not always that way and everything, right. So how are you finding, you have found common ground with some Republicans on some things, on disclosure of toxics, et cetera. So how do you operate in a legislature looking at the humans while recognizing this big system you just described?
Lots of prayer. Right? Like no person is all one thing, right? Or all another. That's just true. Right? And if we dehumanize people into things, right, and not recognizing the individuality and their humanity, right, that's actually how we create and cause more harm. And I see this a lot where folks' humanity gets reduced to the way that they came here. Folks' humanity gets reduced to just the person that they love, and then people dehumanize them because of those things. right? Like instead of realizing
On both, to be on both sides, there's a lot of
Yeah.
righteous judgment on the left of like the purity test on the left. If you do, if you
Absolutely.
own a gun, like like I don't trust you.
Absolutely, but and this is what I mean when I talk about there being the harm is that you refuse to see the complexity of people's identity, which means that you lose the ability to see the places where you can find common ground. And that's the thing. There's a guy right now in the legislature. If the legislature was open today in Tennessee, he would be advocating against the illegal invasion of immigrants into this country. That's one of his big lynch points, right? And I would get up on the House floor and I would say, that's racist and xenophobic and wrong, right? I think that's immoral. The same person and I have had conversations where he says, I care about clean air, clean water, and clean soil. And I look at him and I say, hey, that we can agree on. That we can work on. And so when I put legislation forward in the General Assembly in a subcommittee, actually agricultural subcommittee, focused on getting more information about toxic release inventory facilities on our website, Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation's website, he was one of the people who supported my legislation. Right? This xenophobic person who I will call a xenophobe and fight against his bad bills is the same person who I also recognize he and I have a similar shared interest, a common concern about protecting clean air, clean water, and clean soil.
But there's so that's what you're labeling the statement, not the person, right? I mean, the behavior, not like he's yes. So that he still listens to you after you call him a xenophobe?
He does, because people are complicated and complex, right? But what would be a disservice to my community, right? Would be a disservice to the cause of the movement for environmental and climate justice would be to say, well, because you do that bad thing, I won't talk to you.
Right.
If I did that for all the people who expelled me, I'd be like a monk, in the State House, because I wouldn't talk to anybody.
So you're talking about you've been this outside agitator. Now you're an inside player. Mm-hmm. And maybe you've seen this in your own life. Some people, they get power. They get into a system.
Oh, yeah.
Lobbyists start coming along. They start, going to golf tournaments, getting fine meals and things, like how do you think about protecting your principles in a system that's known to kind of softly change people who get power and may forget where they came from?
Mm-hmm. Greg, that's a great question, because I'll be honest with you, because we're friends. I see this happen. I serve with people who I have witnessed go into the legislature one way and be transformed by a big office, a new title.
Power, people sort of.
Exactly. People calling you this and calling you that, and you getting invited to these events. And I learned a lesson recently. I was in West Virginia, and a gentleman said, it's really important never to confuse influence and access. Mm. Some folks get access to certain rooms and access to certain people, but they don't have any influence over actually the direction that things are going. And for me, I was really blessed. I got good parents, I got good brothers, I got good family, good grandmamas. And one of the most valuable lessons that I've ever learned and am still learning and practicing with is to never forget where you come from. That means no matter how many times you go to the Oval Office or to the White House, no matter how many wonderful Climate One events that you attend, no matter how many flights you take or places that you go, you never forget where you come from. The people who built me, Memphis made, right? The community that raised me, the church members who bought me shoes and gave me clothes when we couldn't afford them. Never forget the teacher who opened the supply closet and gave me notebooks and pencils when we didn't have school supplies. See, I can never forget all of the moments of my life that got me to the place that I am. And that instills and reinforces a humility when I enter into different places, that there's no amount of donation, there's no amount of gift giving that I could receive that would make me lose my principles and my morals, because I am righteously indignant about the things that I believe. It doesn't mean that I am so hard that I'm not able to be convinced of anything else. But I do believe what I believe so much that it's going to take you a whole lot of work to stop me from believing that climate change is real, that we need to end the gun violence epidemic, that people deserve a higher wage, that women deserve the right to choose, that LGBTQIA people are beloved, right? You're not going to move me from those things. But that's because the anchor that has been built in me, really built in this community where I come from in District 86, can't go away.
Right, and I feel that anchor in your family, and also it feels like, rooted in Appalachia, a region that few Americans honestly visit or understand.
Yeah.
So how
Or
important?
know how to say, right? Right.
Did I say it right?
You did say it right. So when you think about Appalachia, one of the biggest experiences that happened in this past couple of years, there was a fight called the Mountain Valley Pipeline Fight. And all across Appalachia, in Tennessee, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, communities were rallying to stop this pipeline project that ultimately got approved, not because it got all of its necessary permits. It got approved because Senator Joe Manchin struck a deal with the White House to get it approved. And so it was an act of Congress, literally, to seek to defeat 10 years worth of organizing to prevent this project from happening. And what that fight really showed me in a very real way, similar to Keystone XL and even our own fight, is that if we're going to organize well and organize right, it is going to be this multiracial, intergenerational movement of people. And it is poor white folks, it's Native communities, it's wealthy communities that are going to be experiencing the ripple effects that have to organize themselves in a way that says, I realize that if this happens, it's going to have probably worse effects on you, but it's definitely going to negatively affect me. And if we work together, we can disrupt what otherwise would be seen as normal. We can disrupt the status quo. We can disrupt exploitative capitalism. We can disrupt these corporations and these corporate entities that are seeking to pollute us and to take land and to hurt us. If we are going to improve our environment and our climate, it will take more of us collaborating across our differences, recognizing that our similar interest of living and of surviving and of thriving requires the best of our efforts. And to do that with people who may not look like us, live in the same neighborhoods or communities as us, but by doing so, right, doing something outside of the status quo, we reshape what our present is.
And you talked about the path of least resistance and sacrifice zones. One recent example of that is when recent people in Memphis were aware that there's a big data center being built by Elon Musk-backed AI company called Colossus in their own time. AI uses massive amounts of energy. So tell us about this project and what's at stake in Memphis and more broadly.
Yeah, let's talk about this. I do not like Elon Musk. I don't like him. I don't think he does anything that is good or outside of his own personal self-interest.
Well, Tesla disrupted the auto industry and did a lot of good things that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Right.
So he's a complicated human.
He is a complicated human, and I still don't like him. And you can go tell him that I don't. He could take his Tesla. Anywho, look. And it is kind of amazing, right? They got all this fancy technology and tools, and it's just like, and you can't use that same technology to figure out how to do something in a way that doesn't pollute and kill communities. All this knowledge and information you got, all these resources and scientists you got, and you still can't figure out a way how to have a facility that doesn't use so much energy. Look, this XAI plant currently is using about as much energy as could power 80,000 homes, 1.2 million gallons of water a day. And just recently we learned they're seeking to double this, right? And there's a recent article in Time magazine sort of about the plans and the project. But the way that it came about is so typical for how projects that exploit communities show up. One day you watch the news and you learn that it's coming. There hasn't been a community meeting. It's in my district and I haven't learned anything about it. City councilors, I called them, they hadn't learned anything about it. It was a deal struck between the Chamber of Commerce, the previous mayor and the current mayor, and then we're all supposed to just celebrate it. But no one asked the real questions about the project. And so when it shows up with 18 fossil gas turbines that are operating every single day, polluting the air quality in a county that already has an F in air quality, in a neighborhood that already has a cancer risk that's 4.1 times the national average. The community is the one that has to fight for itself. Because the Chamber of Commerce isn't doing, the mayor didn't do it, they didn't see fit or that we were worthy of the attention that was needed to make sure that this project wouldn't be harmful. And this is what the Byhalia Connection Pipeline revealed to us. It revealed environmental racism's exploitation without information, but it didn't create it. But our community is stronger now than it was 4 years ago. And so, yes, now we are fighting back. Now that we have more resources, more organizations, Memphis Community Against Pollution, Protect Our Aquifer, Southern Environmental Law Center, Young, Gifted, and Green, and so many more, we're able to fight and to let the world know that these projects are harmful and the technology may be new, but the tactic is not.
Yeah, well, Dr. Bullard wrote, the book, The Father of Environmental Justice, The Wrong Complexion for Protection. So this has been going on for a long time. The Tennessee Valley Authority, you mentioned, is a federal utility that serves about 10 million people in several states. It's currently building a new gas plant near Nashville, near but outside your district, more than 100 miles of new pipelines.
Yep.
Part of a plan to replace coal with methane gas, solar, and storage. So they will say they're going toward a cleaner direction, away from coal, which we need to do. Gas is better than coal.
Yep.
What's the problem?
I don't like the TVA either. Jeff Lyash makes $10 million a year. He's the CEO, and he operates the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the federal utility, the largest public utility, as though it's a corporation. And so we need to pay attention to it as though it is a corporation. What do corporations do? They seek to exploit people. They've tried to force Memphis to sign a contract that would never end, to lock in the revenue of Memphis and Shelby County, which is the most substantial part of their revenue in the entire Tennessee Valley. Most of the money comes from Memphis, a community where a third of the people live in poverty. Right? They tried to lock us into a never-ending contract. We fought that. We prevented the signing of that never-ending contract and kept with our 5-year contract. People power does work. And they're seeking to expand. Obviously, you mentioned the pipeline in Cheatham County, but also there's one in Kingston. That's a coal plant that's retiring, where there was also the worst coal ash spill in American history from the TVA. And in Memphis, they're seeking to build more combustion turbines. Again, more fossil gas in the environment, hurting the communities most directly. And they will say this is a bridge fuel, right? These things it's going to help us get to clean energy. But that's not true. There's no bridge worth building that continues to hurt the land, harm the people, pollute the air when there are other alternatives. And the truth is, we have to talk to people in rural communities, right? We have to go into these places and to these spaces and say, look, to have solar panels, it takes up a lot of land. That's reality.
Yeah.
Right? And so if it's going to take up a lot of land, we need to have community benefits agreements with the people whose land is going to be used in our mostly rural parts of our
Yeah, because solar can also be extractive, taking revenue.
It can.
Because solar is always virtuous and clean. Solar can be extractive and send money somewhere else.
That's right.
And not into the communities where it's located.
Where it's located, and that's part of the problem. Right, and we had a solar project in the northern part of our district, and this is what I was explaining to them. I say, if your tactics are the same as the crude oil pipelines, like you're not doing something right.
And if we could get nerdy here for just a second, because you're a climate nerd, a little bit like I am. The environmental impact report of that Tennessee Valley Authority mentioned that the social costs of that project, which means the cost borne by other people, the pollution that's created, causes seas to rise far away, fires far away. This is by their own estimates, up to $7 billion.
Yeah.
So they're acknowledging that there's we don't really want to count that, but we got to kind of say it exists. But this project, which includes solar storage, methane gas, $7 billion in impacts put off on other people in other places.
Exactly. And I think that's low, right? This is like self-reporting, a corporation being asked to self-report. Just think about that. They know that the cost of what they're doing is going to be borne by other people. And their health care bills are going to be borne by other people who lose their homes, other cities, of the states, of the countries that are going to suffer because of more fossil fuels being used and pumped into our atmosphere. And so you think about the multiplier effect of that across the world, but in the neighborhoods where these are going to be, the communities that breathe this air, the communities, the families, the grandmothers, the aunties, the cousins, the children, like, how much is their life worth? How much is the cost of making someone a climate or environmental justice refugee? Like in our own nation, but then in nations across the world. That is what they're trying to calculate. And I think if it were me and I was to see those numbers, I would say, what do I need to do to ensure that fewer people are bearing the burden of the actions that I'm taking? Because what do we know about fossil fuels? The people who contribute the least amount to greenhouse gas emissions suffer the most.
They suffer first and worst.
That's it.
And the Brookings Institution, a Washington think tank, found last year that black voters are more concerned about climate change than the national average and more likely to take action to support climate policy. It found that for black voters, climate change is a higher political concern than abortion and democracy. So what does that mean for this political moment, particularly when what does that mean for this political moment?
It means that, we had the chance to talk with Vice President Harris earlier. It means that we have to pay attention to this issue. When people think about climate change, and I was myself in this bucket, I would think about, young white people hugging trees. But the better image for climate change and environmental injustice, right? It's a young black kid on a CPAP machine because they can't breathe. A better image is taking your grandmothers to the graveyard because they've died of cancer in their early 60s. That's the consequence of environmental and climate change. And I think the image of climate change is changing because these fights are becoming more proximate. It seemed for so long that this was fights way out there. But then Cop City comes into Atlanta. And then Byhalia Pipeline comes into Southwest Memphis. We got more proximate to it and started to realize that something was happening to us. That as I learned, those Valero pipes, those weren't cloud makers, right? As I thought when they were a child, and as I was a child and we drive by them, that was pollution coming out of there, right? Those are flare-offs, and we were breathing that in. I think what's happening in black communities and communities across our country that are experiencing these and are more proximate to them is the resistance. And honestly, if people had paid more attention to where these things were being placed 30, 40, 50 years ago, we wouldn't have a climate crisis. But it was because the black communities, the brown communities, the indigenous communities, the poor communities weren't being cared for then that we're suffering with the consequences now.
Right, and you're a Democrat who says that Democrats are ignoring much of the country. Explain why that is and what impact it has.
Yeah, I mean, 97% of the country roughly is rural. It's like the majority of the country.
By land, not by people.
By land, not by people. And so for Democrats, and I am a proud Democrat, you say that.
I was wondering.
Yeah, I know. People wonder. I'm not switching over. We have to be more proximate to people who are suffering. And I love California. I lived in Massachusetts. But our party and our politics cannot be segregated to just two parts of our country.
The coastal elites who've been kind of running the Chardonnay Democrats.
Exactly, right? The bi-coastal elites, as it were, are not all of the party. We have to go to Nebraska and Iowa and Tennessee and Mississippi and Alabama. We have to go to these places, and particularly in the South, not just because the South has something to say, but if I could tell you this, the litmus test for America's progress, the litmus test for American democracy and our future is actually the South. Why? Because you go to the places where the people are most oppressed to see how good you're doing as a nation with breaking down oppression. If you want to go to see how good San Francisco is, don't go to the fancy rich area. Go to the place that's been most deprived historically of opportunity. And I'll tell you how good San Francisco is doing. And do that in all the places across this country, and you will see that we have a deep desire and need, for a movement for justice to rise up, a movement for justice rooted in love to rise up in the places that have been overlooked, the places that have not gotten enough attention, the places that have been deprived for too long, and to put power and our voice and our resources and our money in those places to create the transformative change that we need. And so for Democrats, that is talking to white, that's talking to black, that's talking to Asian, that's talking to Latino, that's talking to rural, that's talking to urban, that's talking to the farmers, that's talking to the cattle ranchers, that's talking to everybody, because what I know to be true about the policies that I advocate for and that I believe in is that these are policies that are beneficial to everybody. And if the racism and white supremacy and patriarchy and homophobia and transphobia and xenophobia become the divisionist tools that other colleagues continue to use, we will never build a more perfect union. We'll never build a more perfect San Francisco, a more perfect California, a more perfect country. We have to be sure that we talk to everybody, because the coalition that we need to save our climate, to fix this planet, to fix these problems has to be a diverse one, has to be an intergenerational one.
Right, but some of your friends in the Republican legislature in Tennessee would say identity politics on the left, all these labels, that is divisive. You're making, you talk inclusion, but the way the left uses identity politics divides us. Well, how do you respond to that?
The way the right uses identity politics divides us, right? You're saying things like white power, right? Like you're saying things like immigrants are bad and are evil, or there's an invasion. Those are the things that divide us. You're saying things like white lives matter in response to people saying black lives matter. These are the things that divide us. And we have to be honest. Republicans and conservatives use identity politics. Right? The first thing they said after Vice President Harris got to the top of the ticket was that she was a DEI hire. They use identity politics all the time.
That was one. That message is out there. It's not everyone who is saying that. That message was one of the talking points for sure.
That was one of the talking points. It was said by a congressman from Tennessee, Congressman Burchett. It was said by another congresswoman, and it got so bad that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, told his caucus, stop talking about her race. Right? Like this is what we have to contend with, is a reality that people don't want to talk about identity politics when it comes to inclusion, but they're okay talking about identity politics when it comes to self-preservation of whiteness and self-preservation of separation of othering people. When we talk about identity, when I talk about identity, we have to talk about it in a way that's celebratory. I don't want anybody to look at me, as I have had leaders in my own party do, and say, I'm colorblind. I said, you're what? I said, so what color am I? Well, I don't see color. And they say this as though this is something that's good, that's something that's beneficial, and not erasure.
Yeah, it's a very privileged thing to say that. You know, I learned a lot by reading White Fragility and learning there from the book that I highly recommend to my white friends who because it's like the fish that doesn't see the water, how whiteness is constructed as a norm. And
exactly.
It's just, I'm colorblind. I didn't hurt you. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, I didn't see that. I didn't see that. But then you pass laws that have consequences that we know are disproportionate.
I'd like to invite Ariane and Annie to come up to the microphone. We have time for a couple of audience questions. And welcome Ariane and Annie.
Awesome.
My name is Ariane Harrison. I am the ED of Marie Harrison Community Foundation for Social and Environmental Justice. Thank you so much for being here today. If we could have put together our twos and fews and got you out of here, we would have had you out here sooner. But thank you, Climate One, for bringing this man right here. It's like we're talking about those sacrifice zones. Let me tell you, District 10 in San Francisco is a sacrifice zone and has been that way since the 1950s. Mm-hmm. We have the highest rate of respiratory lung disease, asthma amongst youth and adults at 80%. We have the highest rate of cancer, documented and undocumented, in District 10. We are home to 300 Superfund sites. We collect over 80% of San Francisco's waste. Right now, we have 1.6 billion gallons of toxic waste, biosolids being dumped into our oceans and in our bay, which is going into our food source, which we have a crabbing industry here in the sea industry, correct? You know, I want all of my activists in the room, those that believe in preserving life of animals and saving whales, to know that they have to save human beings too. Hashtag save the humans. You know, one of the coalitions that we have is the Can We Live coalition right here in San Francisco. Right now, I am credited to have the first AB 617 that's completely, absolutely diverse. That's through a lot of community activism and talking to our neighbors. We have a BIPOC community in District 10, but for a long time they heard the black voices speaking about being directly affected. Me, myself, personally, I participated in the first urinalysis tox screen testing that took place in District 10. And I'm here to tell you that when I got the results to that test, I didn't want to believe it was true. Now, I am not a doctor, but I adopted the language. I'm not a scientist, but I adopted the language because there was nobody fighting for us. Nobody was coming to save us. We had to stand on business and try to save ourselves. I came up positive after taking 5 different tests from 5 different laboratories. One of the biggest ones on this side of California in Livermore. Okay, I came up positive for PCI 24, uranium and plutonium exposure. I have elevated levels of manganese, rubidium. These are radioactive isotopes. If it's coming out through my urine, guess what? That means it's in my body. That's a bone-seeking element. If it's true for me, staying in close proximity, being a 7th generational child, a legacy child of Bayview Hunters Point, how come that isn't true for our residents and for our kids? San Francisco needs to get off its high horse. It needs to get off its high horse. We can't be the do-it-first city or the leaders in climate justice when we have an elephant that's been in the room for decades. We need some form of repair. We have a health rights crisis that's going on there. We have a human rights issues that's been in existence in the southeast sector of San Francisco. Meanwhile, nobody was manning the ranch where industry meets housing, and nobody's holding them accountable. There's a clear lack of oversight and accountability when it comes to giving out these permission slips to some of these polluting organizations that have been in our community for decades. If the guy with the hot dog stand needs a permit to sell his hot dogs on the corner,
Say that.
then that means that these companies need permits too. If they have a permit that's been in the system for years but hasn't got any transaction, they need to be shut down. We need to start inviting. District 10 is beautiful. We have the best scenery in San Francisco and the most beautiful views. But I'm telling you, San Francisco, you need to be on high alert. Sea level rise is a real thing. We have standing water sources in District 10. But we also have so much toxic chemical waste up under the ground that is just coming to a neighborhood near you. As soon as they want to cap it, and we're in earthquake country, let me tell you, it's no longer a District 10 issue. It is a San Francisco issue. It's the stuff that is there is going to affect all San Franciscans. I'm asking you guys to join us. I'm in lockstep with us to actually once and for all take care of this generational curse that's been happening in District 10. My name is Ariane Harrison.
Thank you,
I am
Ariane.
Executive Director
Yeah.
of Marie Harrison Community Foundation. You can find me at www.canwelive.org. Thank you.
Wow.
Please look that up, canwelive.org. That's so, there are a couple of things that I want to lift up. The plant that you talked about, Greg, with Elon Musk is operating without a permit to burn those 18 combustion turbines. They say they don't need a permit for an entire year. And we're going to the Environmental Protection Agency to demand that the Shelby County Health Department use all of its authority and action to do something about it. Because to your point, if to play music in the subway or to have a hot dog stand, you need a permit. Certainly to pollute an entire community's air quality, you need a permit. And then there's something else you said, right, about historical legacy pollution. Communities that have been polluted for decades and have been suffering for decades, not in silence, but have been silenced, is a real issue. We have something called the Memphis Defense Depot. Frank W. Johnson, his family's been fighting that community, and Marquita Bradshaw for a long time, where the United States federal government was actually burying mustard gas and all types of things in the soil. And a lot of the people in the neighborhood developed all types of very rare forms of cancer and illnesses. And there has been no reparation for that harm. And so it will take, and it does take, and this is a lifetime commitment of organizing and mobilizing and activating two people who are in positions of power to do something for us to improve the quality of life for everybody. Because as Heather McGee wrote in an amazing book, The Sum of Us, we share the same sky. And I don't know if y'all know this, but there's no line in the sky where it says, I have now left the poor black community or the poor brown community or the poor white community. There's no line in the sky that says those things. We might experience it worse, but we all are sharing the same planet.
We have a podcast with Heather McGee. If you look at Climate One, you can find her.
She's amazing.
Let's go to our question, Annie.
Thank you so much. My name is Annie Leonard. It's really been a pleasure to hear you both. Thank you so much for coming to California. You mentioned the need for people power and organizing against polluting and extractive projects like the MVP or like what we just heard about, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, or we just heard about in District 10, and I totally agree. But as you well know, in response to the organizing against the Mountain Valley Pipeline, the states actually passed anti-protest laws that criminalize protest, and the corporations filed SLAP suits, strategic lawsuits against public participation. Do you have any advice as an elected official and as a righteous protester yourself? How do we push back on this criminalization and vilification of a protest at a time when we need peaceful protest more than ever?
That's such a great question. I think in two ways. One, we need good lawyers. And there are some good ones, right? You got Earth Justice. I work with an amazing lawyer, Katie Redford. We need good lawyers on our side, movement lawyers who understand the work and the responsibility of protecting our First Amendment right, and the need to protect and fight for our planet with all that we've got. And look, I'll just be honest and frank with you. There are risks involved in a movement for justice rooted in love. And love for the planet, love for our air, love for our neighborhoods, love for our communities. They're a risk. But we have to, and you have to decide for yourselves, what risk are you willing to take on? I remember when we started the pipeline fight, somebody told me, I'm willing to do everything, but I'll never get arrested for this pipeline, right? And then I knew which box I was putting them in, right, for my own personal reasons. But there are some folks who say, I'll go all the way for this, right, because it's that important. Right, because I don't have any other choice. Right? And you have to determine where that is for you, where God calls you to be on that spectrum. And on one spectrum, one issue may be here, and one issue may be there. But there's risk involved in fighting for what you believe in. And the tradition in which I come from, right, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the Dr. Kings, the Malcolm X's, the Murray Evers, the Medgar Evers, like a lot of people have risked their lives and limbs and the lot for progress to happen in this country. And we all will have to risk something. I risked my job and got expelled for it, right? We all have to risk something. But the urgency of the moment requires us to give all that we can to this fight and all that we can to the right and the human right to drink clean air, to drink clean water, to breathe clean air, to plant in clean soil is a human right.
Justin J. Pearson, thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much. Thank
I'd like to give a shout out to the team here, Adam, Dan, Megan, Brad, Jenny, Austin, Ariana, and Ben.
God bless you. Thank you. Please. Thank you so much.
Podcasts of this and other Climate One shows are available wherever you get your pods. You know, you can give us a rating and review. That really helps more people find this show. You can find also Reverend Lennox Yearwood. He talks about paying the ultimate sacrifice and willing to put risk it all for his environmental justice cause as head of the Hip Hop Caucus. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Thank you, my friend. I was with him Sunday.